Elliot, how do you feel companies do you feel companies are, generally doing a good job helping candidates get through the process or navigating through a recruiting process?
All right, yes and no. I think, yes, they're more conscious of it. Certainly there's a whole spate of new technologies. There's the CRM du jour that arises every month. But the reality is the recruiting process, if you're on the candidate side, is a scary and uncomfortable one. You're going to fly halfway across the country, sit in a room full of strangers, and essentially justify everything you've done in your life. You're going to go home, you're going to tell your spouse you like the opportunity, they're going to get upset about potentially moving, and you're going to make your kids cry. That's a pretty good summary of what candidates go through. So, having a piece of technology that sends you an automated email message every other week doesn't cut it. Having a chatbot call to tell you when your interview is scheduled doesn't cut it. To get somebody through that process, they need to have emotional touch points. So I like the fact that in communication, you talk about phone calls with recruiters, because all the technology should do is be a platform to help sort of schedule and orchestrate human interaction. They need support. They need someone to talk to. And I think most candidates know that it's not an impartial arbiter. The recruiter has a vested interest in them taking the job, and they know that. I think most honest recruiters don't try to hide it. But the reality is, it's about human interaction. I think that all the spate of technology out there that's saying, well, we can help, completely automate the process. I think there's large sections of the recruiting process that can be done by bots and technology. But helping somebody through the process and helping them get engaged and excited requires human interaction.
Well, recruiters are definitely not helping their cause. Recruiters, and I say recruiters, I'm a recruiter myself. We receive low ranks on adequacy and accuracy of information overall as an industry. With the way competition for candidates is now, as you can see from the slide we have up, candidates are getting hammered with calls from recruiters. Only about a third of the job candidates agree with the following statements: that they receive good communication about job opportunities, or that the recruiter did a good job detailing and preparing me for interviews. And so, we understand that the industry's got to get better. There's some things that we're doing about it, but, I would probably say that most people on this phone call at one point or the other has gotten a call from a recruiter, and there's recruiters that we, just hang the phone up on or say no thanks, and then there's other recruiters that present a compelling enough communication style and message to capture you to listen or build a relationship with you. So again, engagement is about communication. Elliot is right. I believe that 8, 9, 10 years ago there was this race to automate engagement, and we're back to where we were, back to where I never left, and that was the human interaction between a recruiter, a hiring manager, and a candidate is the most critical thing when it comes to facilitating a hire. Engaging candidates in their own environment, communicating via their preferred method. Elliot mentioned text and bots and stuff like that. Different people communicate in different ways. Figure out which ways your audience communicates and message to them that way, and also try other ways. Providing feedback and status updates to every single applicant. That is very difficult. Katy and I were just talking about, we were looking at the numbers over this last quarter, and we looked at the funnel of candidates that we had initially sourced, and then we looked at ultimately the number of hires we had, and we had obviously there's a
7X or 7X or
yeah, 7 or 8x candidates ultimately were dispositioned. And so those candidates were dispositioned once for a position that they had either applied for or been brought into the process, but that's a talent pool for us. That is they may never work for NCI. They may come back and be qualified for another position down the road. We may come back to them, but that is an important piece that often gets missed, is those candidates that get dispositioned. You've already spent the money to go out and identify them some way, treat them with fairness, and treat them with engaged prowess to your brand. Additionally, preparing candidates adequately for interviews. It is recruiting's duty to ensure that the candidates that are brought in are properly engaged, and part of that engagement is being educated. Are there other practices, and I'll put this out to Elliot and Katy, are there other practices within the communication piece that you feel companies out there could do better or should be doing?
Well, I'm going to offer a quick question, a quick comment, and then I'd like to get Katy's take on it because she's in the front line. We did a study last year, and we asked, it was a sponsored research study. It was quite large, and it was global, and we had hundreds of respondents, and it was on or actually thousands of respondents. It was a candidate study, and we looked at generational and geographical differences, and here's what we found generationally. The most favorite way for people my age, the baby boomers, to be contacted was over email. Didn't like phone calls. Least favorite was LinkedIn. You move down to Gen X, most favorite email, least favorite LinkedIn. Move down to millennials, most favorite email, least favorite LinkedIn. Now, people are beating the bejeebers out of LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. Candidates don't like it. They feel like it's an intrusion. And I think people have to think about, how you're going to contact candidates. Nowadays using various search techniques, you can actually ascertain the email addresses. It might be a better strategy to go back to that than continue to use, and my LinkedIn is a client, and I have friends there, and whatever. And I think LinkedIn is a great way to identify candidate pools. Their in-house messaging system might not be the best way to interact with them, because people look at that messaging system as being for their network, not for people coming in with solicitation. So that's my advice on best practices. You think about how to contact candidates that maybe they'll feel more positive about. And right now, it doesn't seem like LinkedIn and Facebook they can be effective, but they may not be the most engaging, if that's the word we're focusing on.
Yeah, that makes sense, Elliot. I mean, folks sign up for Facebook and Instagram accounts initially for the social aspect of it, and social to me means family and friends and things like that. And then all of a sudden, we're trying to create these huge recruitment strategies around a social network, and there is a level of intrusion and privacy.
Great.
All right, let's move to the third C. Let's talk about clarity. So, alignment between talent programs and strategic objectives is equivalent to a D, bad grade. Elliot and I have talked about this time and time again, the alignment between how companies go out and acquire talent and the actual desired business outcomes of that business are far apart. And so as we talk about some of the things that we can do, we need to do a better job as HR leaders and business leaders and recruitment leaders across the board to better map our recruiting initiatives to the strategic business outcomes, or things that are absolutely measurable. We talk about measuring what matters. People measure everything. But how are we measuring what we're doing on the front end to the actual business outcome? That's something that we absolutely have to pay more attention to. Elliot, give me an example kind of about a recruiter, and we had talked about this, about a recruiter that had contacted you or somebody that you knew that had very limited or didn't really even know what they were recruiting for. I mean, this is a good example of what we're seeing across the board in recruitment.
Yeah, ironically, because I'm somewhat high profile, I will get, calls all the time from recruiting firms about, either wanting to place people here or wanting to solicit me for a job, not knowing that I have an equity participation interest in the company. And, jobs sometimes that wouldn't be appropriate for me anyway. I think that ultimately, the worst case scenario, and I've had this happen a few times, is when the candidate calls and doesn't actually know, or a recruiter calls me as a candidate and doesn't actually know anything about me but my name and my title. Okay, and I think that, depending on the level, it's one thing if it's an hourly employee, a semi-skilled job, but as you move up through the ranks into the professional, technical, and managerial levels, the information about people is out there and available. Make sure you're well prepared for that recruiting call, for that contact call, something about the person's progression of their career, et cetera. Because when you don't, you sort of seem silly, if you will, and you can and should be well prepared. In terms of specific anecdotes, I am tempted, Cory, to name names, but I won't. Okay, but I have gotten calls where it's almost comedic. One call I received, and I'll just mention this as an anecdote, several years ago, was for a sales leadership job at IBM in the Connexa division, and the person had not looked up online to discover that I actually had been COO there. So, it happens, but that's an example of how it might be the great job for somebody, but the recruiter begins to lose the battle before it's even waged.
We're going to move through to candidate engagement, best practices, and operational leadership. So, one of the things that is critical is tracking and then taking that data or information and reducing inefficiencies or clearing paths. When they work properly, the infrastructure and everybody behind the scenes, HR, IT, and finance, they don't get noticed. It just works. So when data and other areas of measurements don't work, it can derail best intentions. So I wanted to pull up putting KPIs to work. So this is a survey that we did asking these similar questions some time ago. So 42% of HR leaders out there don't review talent acquisition performance metrics. 42% don't use them to inform business decisions. And then, of that, 55% of those that don't use metrics say it's because they aren't relevant or useful to their planning process. We run up against it time and time again where we'll engage with a potential client. The client will have a preconceived notion of what they're going to need in metrics. We, of course, counsel on what should be measured in an engagement to start, and then, of course, have the capabilities to adjust in those measurements. But we, as a human capital community, need to just get better at data and what we do with the data, and again, ultimately, better aligning that data with ultimately with business outcomes. Some of the talent acquisition metrics that matter, you've all seen these. Time to submit, how well is the sourcing channel's effectiveness? How are we getting them quick? Do we have them pre-ready? Are we engaging them quick enough? Candidate drop-off rate. So are we losing folks through the process, whether that be through a manual process of phone calling and walking candidates through the process, or an electronic process where they have to complete an online application or submit for a certain job. So things that absolutely are critical. Hire to start time. So how streamlined is the onboarding process? Are there ways to make it simpler, to cut out steps? Candidates, once you have them engaged and sold on the job and you get that commitment, they want to start work and they want to get going. And then retention and turnover. So in the end, how are we doing? Katy and I are in the process of putting together a complete program to measure 2016 and 2017, and as we go through that, we're looking at areas that are they still here? What specific job families are leaving earlier than others? When are the leavers leaving? Is it between 3 and 6 months? Is it after that year time frame? How much turnover has been in the supervisory or management level? So these are all things that if you measure them correctly and you understand how they can impact your engagement on the front end or adjust your engagement, you're gonna win. Reducing red tape. So again, how many different systems does a candidate have to touch through the hiring process? How many forms are there? Are there steps in the onboarding process? And is there clear handoff between the recruiter? And then what's the perspective on onboarding? I've talked to people throughout my years that have had the attitude like, oh, I got to onboard a bunch of new people. Oh, I've got to take these new people here. Oh, I've got a new class right here. And then I've also worked with leading companies that make it an experience, not only an opportunity, but an experience for the new employee through the onboarding. So, again, going back to when do new employees stop looking for their job, or when are they looking for their next job? It's early on, and you've got a touch point there to capture them and engage them in your brand. There are several engageable moments: onboarding, performance reviews, goal setting, recognition, training, really any touch point that is facilitated by a manager and an employee or somebody within that peer group. These are areas that you can capitalize on immediately, and that you can tie your engagement programs into each one of these scheduled moments. And so, and we're running up on time here, but I'm going to ask Elliot the question. Elliot, what do you feel some of the leading companies out there are doing with these engageable moments? Is there anything that sticks out?
Well, first of all, I think you're making some great points here, and I think that the issue with the quote-unquote engageable moments is that they actually, are recognized by the employer as important moments. So, for example, if you look at companies like, PricewaterhouseCoopers or a, E&Y that are onboarding literally, thousands of new grads each year, they'll send them to PwC University, and they'll give them 2 weeks of orientation, and here's about work life, etc. Now, you're not going to do that with every candidate, but to Katy's point earlier, you need to have an onboarding plan, right? If you're bringing on large groups of people, pharmaceutical industry does this very well with new salespeople. You might start your job on May 12th, but the next sort of sales, training program is July 1st, but you're going to be there. And they'll bring everyone together and sort of teach not only job-related skills and how systems work and whatever, but they'll teach culture. And they'll teach about here's what your experience working for XYZ company should be like. So I think that those moments, if they're recognized, and then the performance reviews, are important, but what a lot of companies don't do well is recognition. The managers are not well trained to authentically give feedback and recognition in a way that helps drive culture. That's an area where I think we could see improvement.
So back to the million-dollar question, and we're wrapping up now, but we asked earlier, we want to provide top takeaways for how you can improve engagement and really translate candidate goodwill into ultimately employee performance. Some of the things that we had talked about along the way that you can start doing immediately or working towards is aligning HR and business goals, which is probably the most critical thing here as far as getting an anchor, instilling culture into the complete hiring cycle, over-communicate with candidates. I've never heard a candidate that was being considered for a specific job say, stop calling me, you've given me too much information. Automate the manual recruiting processes where you can, and demand and use performance metrics, and again, the right metrics, and we can do a whole nother webinar. Streamline your onboarding processes. Engage employees at every career stage, so it doesn't matter whether they're a new employee or they've been there for 10 years, engagement is critical.
Cory, I want to thank you, and please extend my thanks to Katy. I know you're there at NCI today to do this webcast. I think there was a tremendous amount of great information. I hope the audience came away with something. This webcast will be online for at least 6 months for your consumption on demand. So please, check back or send it to colleagues you think would benefit from it. We appreciate your time and your attention, and we thank you for listening in. This is Elliot Clark. I'm the CEO of HRO Today. I'm joined today by Cory Kruse, the president of Orion Novotus, talking about how to turn candidate engagement into employee engagement and drive productivity. Thanks, Cory, and we'll look forward to having you on again.
Well, thank you, Elliot, and thank everybody for taking time out of your day. This is passionate stuff for us and definitely important for your business.
Great. All right. We'll send you on your way this afternoon to do whatever HR things you need to do, and please look out for our next webinar. Good afternoon.